might tell you this is just the most bizarre story I've ever seen in being involved in law enforcement.
In the early morning hours of April 22, 2016, 3 homes belonging to the Roden family became the site of one of the most brutal massacres Ohio has ever known. 8 members of the same family, ranging in age from 16 to 44, were shot execution-style in their beds. Each victim was found in their own home, scattered across a rural property in Pike County. Most were killed with multiple gunshots to the head, fired at close range while they slept. But here's what made this case even more haunting. 3 young children, all under the age of 3, were found alive and unharmed, sleeping just feet away from their murdered family members.
The hurt don't go away from a mother. I think about it day and night. I lose a lot of sleep over it.
The scene was so methodical, so calculated, that investigators initially believed it was the work of a professional hit squad, maybe a cartel, maybe organized crime. But the truth? It was something far more personal. A crime born not from business or rivalry, but from obsession, control, and a custody battle that spiraled into unthinkable violence. This is the story of the Pike County Massacre, and how a 2-year-old girl became the key to unlocking one of the most shocking family conspiracies in modern American history.
There's blood all over the house. Okay. My brother-in-law's in the bedroom. It looks like I beat the hell out of him. Okay. There's blood all over the front room.
Ma'am, can you tell me what county that's in? Is it
Pike County?
It's Pike County?
Yes, and he's drugging in the bedroom.
Okay. I need you to get out of the house. Did you drive over there?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
First one's in there. Looks like they're dead.
You think they're both dead?
I think they're both dead. Looks like someone has beat the fuck out of them.
Okay. Is there anybody else in the house?
Not that I know of.
The voice you just heard belongs to Bobby Jo Manley, sister of one of the victims. On the morning of April 22, 2016, she arrived at the family's property on Union Hill Road in Peebles, Ohio, a rural stretch of land where her brother Christopher Roden Sr. lived with extended family members spread across 3 mobile homes. Bobby Jo was there to feed the chickens and dogs, a routine she'd done countless times before. But that morning, something felt wrong the moment she stepped onto the property. The first trailer she entered belonged to her brother Chris. The house was quiet, too quiet. She called out, but there was no answer. She moved through the living room, and that's when she saw him. Christopher Roden Sr., 40 years old, was lying motionless in his bed. His body had been struck by 9 gunshot wounds, 5 to the head and face, 3 to his torso, and 1 to his arm. It appeared he had tried to shield himself in his sleep. It was the only sign of struggle in the entire house. In a nearby bedroom, Bobby Jo found Gary Roden, Chris's 38-year-old cousin. He had been shot twice in the head. A third bullet had been fired so close to his temple that it left a muzzle stamp on his skin. There were no signs of resistance. Gary had likely been asleep when the killer struck. Trembling, Bobby Jo immediately called 911. But the horror didn't stop there. Her brother James arrived shortly after, and together they made their way to the second trailer, home to Chris's eldest son, Frankie Roden, and his fiancée, Hannah Hazel Gilley. What they found inside was almost too much to bear. Frankie, 20 years old, had been shot 3 times in the head and face. Hannah, 19, had been shot through the eye, then 4 more times. They were lying in bed together, and between them, completely unharmed, was their 4-month-old son, still asleep and pretty much alive. On the floor nearby, their 3-year-old was also found safe, untouched by the violence that had unfolded just feet away. Bobby Jo and James then rushed to the third residence, a camper owned by Dana Roden, Chris Sr.'s ex-wife. Inside, they discovered 3 more bodies. Dana, 37, had been shot 5 times in the head, including a point-blank shot through her temple and another fired upward under her chin. In a nearby bedroom, her 16-year-old son, Chris Jr., had been shot twice through the top of his head. And in the back room, they found 19-year-old Hannah Mae Roden, who had given birth to her second daughter just 5 days earlier. Hannah had been shot twice in the head. Her newborn was found still alive, lying beside her mother's body, attempting to nurse. Fortunately, Hannah's 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, had been staying with her father that night and had been spared. By this point, first responders were flooding the scene. The community began to gather in shock, trying to comprehend what had happened. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. Donald Stone, a cousin of Chris Roden Sr., grew worried about another family member, Kenneth Roden, who lived a few miles down the road. Kenneth hadn't answered his phone all morning. Stone and 2 friends drove to his property, found the door unlocked, and walked inside. Kenneth Roden, 44, was dead. He had been shot once through the eye at close range. 8 members of the Roden family murdered in their own homes, and yet there were almost no clues, no shell casings, no gunshots heard by neighbors, no forced entry. Even the family's 2 pit bulls, known for being fiercely protective, never barked. It was as if the killers had been ghosts.
This is the largest family massacre in Ohio history. Now we're going on 6 months and still no motive or any arrests. The Pike County coroner asked Hamilton County to take care of the autopsy reports that show the family members were all shot in the head.
The Pike County Sheriff's Office immediately called in the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation and the FBI. The scale of the crime was unlike anything the rural county had ever seen. Forensic teams combed through every inch of the 3 properties, collecting evidence, taking photographs, searching for anything that might point to a suspect. But the deeper they dug, the stranger things became. First, there were no cell phones. Not a single phone was found among any of the victims. This raised immediate red flags. Had the phones been deliberately taken to remove evidence? To erase communications? Second, there were no signs of theft. Money, electronics, and valuables were left untouched. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was targeted. Third, the timing was surgical. The killers had moved from home to home without being heard or seen. They knew the layout. They knew where everyone slept. And they knew which children to leave alive. Investigators also noted something chilling. The 2 pit bulls that normally barked at strangers hadn't made a sound. That suggested the dogs recognized whoever entered the property that night. As the community reeled, rumors began to spread. Some pointed to the family's past. Chris Roden Sr. and his brother Kenneth had both had run-ins with the law. A marijuana grow operation was discovered near Kenneth's property, and whispers of a cockfighting ring began to circulate. Could this have been a cartel hit? A drug deal gone wrong? Some speculated the Roden family had connections to the infamous Cornbread Mafia, a drug trafficking network known to operate in the Appalachian region. But investigators found no solid evidence linking the family to organized crime of that scale. Hundreds of tips poured in, rewards were posted, but every lead seemed to hit a dead end. Meanwhile, the fate of the 3 surviving children hung in the air, and one name kept surfacing in the background, a name that would eventually blow the case wide open: Jake Wagner. Jake Wagner was the father of 2-year-old Sophia, Hannah Mae Roden's eldest daughter, and his family had a history with the Rodens that ran deeper than most people realized. The relationship between Jake and Hannah began in 2011 when they met at the Pike County Fairgrounds. Hannah was just 13 years old, still a child really, while Jake was nearly 18. What started as a casual conversation about rabbits at the fair quickly turned into something more serious. And despite the troubling age gap, Hannah's father, Chris Roden Sr., gave his approval for the relationship to continue. But there were conditions. Hannah was never allowed to be alone with Jake. A chaperone, Usually a family member had to accompany them on every outing. It was a rule meant to protect Hannah, but it also revealed that even Chris had concerns about the dynamic between the two teenagers. Chris Roden Sr. knew Jake's father, Billy Wagner. The two men had crossed paths before, likely through shared connections in the tight-knit rural community. Some speculated they had been involved in similar circles. Rumors of drug dealing and under-the-table business deals swirled around both families. Whether that familiarity made Chris more willing to trust the Wagners, or whether he simply underestimated the danger they posed, remains unclear. But what is clear is that he allowed his teenage daughter to enter a relationship that would eventually spiral into tragedy. As the years went on, the relationship between Jake and Hannah became increasingly toxic. Friends and family members later testified that Jake was controlling and possessive. He didn't like Hannah spending time with anyone outside of his family. He monitored who she talked to, where she went, and what she did. And when things didn't go his way, he became violent. At one point, Hannah confided in her father that Jake had choked her during an argument. The incident terrified her, and she fled back home, telling Chris that she couldn't handle the pressure anymore, not just from Jake, but from the entire Wagner family. The Wagners were a tightly controlled unit. Billy and Angela ran the household with an iron fist, and their sons, Jake and George, were raised in near isolation. Both boys were homeschooled, kept away from outside influences, and taught to obey their parents without question. Even after Jake's parents divorced, the family remained unnervingly close. Angela lived just down the road, and the family dynamic never loosened. When George got married, his wife was absorbed into the Wagner world. When Jake started his relationship with Hannah, it became clear that she too would be expected to submit to the family's control. But Hannah was growing up. She was starting to see the relationship for what it really was, an unhealthy, suffocating trap. And in 2015, she made a decision that would change everything. She posted a message on Facebook, publicly declaring that she would never give her daughter Sophia to Jake, even if it cost her life. It was a bold statement, born out of frustration and fear. Hannah wanted the world to know that she was serious about protecting her daughter. But what she didn't realize was that Jake and his mother, Angela Wagner, had already hacked into her Facebook account. They were monitoring her every move, reading her private messages, and tracking her online activity. That post didn't just anger Jake, it became a flashpoint for the entire Wagner family. Shortly after, Hannah began dating someone new, Charlie Gilley, the brother of her sister-in-law, Hannah Hazel Gilley. The relationship moved quickly, and by early 2016, Hannah discovered she was pregnant with her second child. For Jake, this was the final betrayal. Not only had Hannah rejected him, but she was now building a new life with another man and bringing another child into the world that wasn't his. Most people, faced with rejection and heartbreak, eventually move on. They grieve, they heal, they rebuild. But Jake Wagner didn't move on, and neither did his family. Instead of accepting the reality that Hannah had moved forward without him, the Wagners did something unthinkable. They began to plan her murder. Months before Hannah gave birth to her second daughter, the Wagner family gathered around a table and discussed a chilling proposal. This wasn't a moment of rage or a crime of passion. This was a calculated, methodical conspiracy, one that involved every member of the immediate family. Billy Wagner, the patriarch, laid out the plan. If they wanted permanent, uncontested custody of Sophia, they couldn't just kill Hannah. They had to eliminate anyone who might challenge them in court. That meant her parents, her siblings, anyone who could step in and fight for the child. According to later testimony from Jake himself, the family actually voted on the plan. They discussed who would need to die, how they would carry it out, and what they would do afterward to cover their tracks. It was a family meeting, except instead of discussing holiday plans or household chores, They were deciding who would live and who would die. The final count? 7 people. And once the murders were carried out, Angela Wagner would present the forged custody documents she had been preparing. Documents that falsely claimed Hannah had agreed to give Sophia to Jake in the event of her death. It was a plan so cold, so calculated, that even seasoned investigators would later struggle to comprehend how a family could sit together and vote on something so monstrous. But the Wagners had made their decision, and the clock was ticking. They started by purchasing athletic shoes from a local Walmart. Wrong sizes, brand new, never worn. These shoes would be used only on the night of the killings, ensuring that any footprints left behind couldn't be traced back to them. They bought .22 caliber handguns and semi-automatic pistols, quieter than larger calibers, with less recoil. They also acquired homemade suppressors, which wouldn't silence the gunshots completely, but would reduce the noise to a muffled cough, just quiet enough that no one outside the trailers would hear. They purchased brass catchers, small pouches that attached to the pistols to collect spent shell casings, ensuring no physical evidence would be left behind. And they bought a cell phone jamming device designed to block any outgoing calls for help. In the months leading up to the murders, Jake and his brother George spent hours practicing in the woods behind their property. Investigators later found bullets lodged in trees and remnants of a burned-out homemade suppressor, proof that the Wagners had rehearsed their plan over and over. They even dyed their hair to alter their appearances. Meanwhile, Angela Wagner forged custody documents claiming that Hannah had signed a statement saying that if anything happened to her, Sophia should go to Jake and his family. The Wagners also began staking out the Roden family's homes. They learned everyone's routines, when they came home, when they went to bed, who visited after dark. They knew the layout of every trailer. They knew where the dogs slept. They knew which children would be home. By April 21st, 2016, they were ready. On the night of April 21st, just days after Hannah gave birth to her second daughter, Sophia was sent to stay with the Wagners for a couple of nights. This gave them the perfect window. Late that night, the Wagners drove to the Roden property. Billy Wagner, the patriarch, entered Chris Roden Sr.'s trailer under the pretense of discussing a drug deal. Jake and George waited outside in the truck. Once inside, Billy moved quickly. He shot Chris Roden Sr. and Gary Roden while they slept. Then he signaled for his sons. Together, they moved from home to home, systematically executing every adult and teenager in their path. Frankie and Hannah Gilly, Dana Roden, Chris Jr., Hannah May. But they left the young children alive, just as they had planned. The infants, the toddlers, none of them were harmed. After the killings, the Wagners disposed of the evidence with chilling precision. They abandoned the truck. They discarded their clothes and shoes. And the weapons, the guns, shell casings, and suppressor remnants were placed in gallon buckets, filled with wet cement, and turned into boat anchors. The anchors were then dropped into a local lake, where they would sink to the bottom, far from anyone's reach. The Wagners returned home. They cleaned up, and then they went to sleep. The next morning, they woke up and went about their lives as if nothing had happened. In the hours and days immediately following the massacre, the Wagners played their roles perfectly. They expressed shock and horror when news of the murders spread through Pike County. They attended vigils. They offered condolences to grieving community members. Billy Wagner even had the audacity to appear concerned for Sophia's well-being, positioning himself and his family as the grieving relatives who just wanted to make sure the little girl was taken care of. And then, just weeks after the murders, the Wagners made their move. They filed for custody of Sophia, presenting the forged documents that Angela had carefully prepared. Documents that falsely claimed Hannah Mae Roden had signed a statement granting Jake and his family custody of her daughter in the event of her death. To anyone unfamiliar with the situation, it might have seemed like a reasonable request. After all, Jake was Sophia's biological father, and with Hannah gone, it made sense that he would want to raise his daughter. But to those who knew Hannah, the documents felt wrong. Friends and family members recalled her public declaration on Facebook that she would never give Sophia to Jake, even if it cost her life. The timing of the custody filing, combined with the convenient appearance of these documents, raised suspicions. But without concrete evidence linking the Wagners to the crime, there was little anyone could do. And then the Wagners did something that would later become a major red flag in the investigation. They left. Within months of the murders, the entire Wagner family packed up and moved to Alaska, about as far away from Pike County, Ohio, as they could possibly get. The move was sudden, and it was complete. Billy, Angela, Jake, George, and Sophia all relocated together, leaving behind the small rural community where they had lived for years. To investigators, the move was suspicious. Why would a family that had just been granted custody of a child, supposedly to keep her close to her roots and her surviving relatives, immediately take her thousands of miles away? Why flee to one of the most remote parts of the country? The Wagners claimed they were simply looking for a fresh start, away from the tragedy and the media attention that had engulfed Pike County. But the timing was too convenient, and their departure left a cloud of suspicion hanging over them. For about a year, the Wagners stayed in Alaska, living quietly and keeping a low profile. Then, just as suddenly as they had left, they returned. When they came back to Pike County, the family dynamic had shifted. Jake Wagner had remarried, a new wife who seemed to be absorbed into the tightly controlled Wagner family unit, just as Hannah had been years earlier. On the surface, the family appeared to be reintegrating into the community. They all took jobs at a local trucking company, working together and maintaining the appearance of a normal, hard-working family. But behind closed doors, cracks were beginning to form. The Wagner family had always operated as a tightly controlled unit. Billy and Angela had raised their sons in near isolation, homeschooled, kept away from outside influences, and taught to obey their parents without question. Even after Billy and Angela divorced, the family remained unnervingly close. Angela lived just down the road, and every major decision was still made collectively as a family. This suffocating control extended to the women who entered the Wagner world. When George got married, his wife was expected to submit to the family's authority. When Jake married his new wife, the same rules applied. Everything was controlled, everything was monitored, and no one was allowed to leave. But then, something happened that would change everything. Two women, Jake's new wife and Angela Wagner herself, suddenly fled the family. The reasons for their departure remain murky. What they told police, what they shared with other family members, and what finally pushed them to escape the Wagner household has never been fully disclosed to the public. But their departure sent shockwaves through the investigation. Shortly after the two women left, law enforcement's focus shifted decisively toward the Wagner family. The carefully constructed illusion of grief-stricken relatives who just wanted to care for Sophia began to crumble. Investigators, who had been quietly building their case for months, now had new information and possibly new witnesses. What had once looked like a professional hit, possibly carried out by a drug cartel or organized crime syndicate, was now being re-examined as something far more personal. The Wagner family's connection to the Rodens, their sudden move to Alaska, their convenient return, and now the flight of two women from within their own household. It all pointed to a conspiracy much closer to home. For 2 years, the Wagners maintained their innocence. They continued working at the trucking company, living their lives as if the massacre had nothing to do with them. But investigators were closing in. Authorities had planted listening devices inside the work trucks used by the Wagner family. They tapped their phones, monitoring every call, every conversation, every movement. The Wagners were under constant surveillance, even if they didn't know it yet. And slowly, the pieces of the puzzle began to come together.
We promised that the day would come when arrests would be made in the Pike County massacres. Today is that day. George Billy Wagner III his wife Angela Wagner, and their sons, George Wagner IV and Edward Jake Wagner. After an extensive, thorough joint investigation by the Attorney General's Office, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, as well as our Special Prosecution Section, and Pike County Sheriff Charles Reeder's office, these 4 individuals are now in custody for allegedly committing this heartless, ruthless, cold-blooded murder.
I'd only been sheriff of Pike County less than a year before April 22nd of 2016. And that day changed a lot of our lives, including mine. The images of the houses, the bodies, the scenes, I can never erase them. Even 20 years of law enforcement experience cannot prepare you fully for a day like that day. Every single day since that day we have worked as a team to figure out who did this in Pike County, where I've spent my entire life. We have obsessively focused on solving this case. We've been patient when it was painful to be, running down every lead, no matter how small. But it all has brought us to this day. Today we have the answer. Members of one family conspired, planned, carried out, and then allegedly covered up their violent act to wipe out members of another family. They did this quickly, coldly, calmly, and very carefully, but not carefully enough.
In November 2018, all 4 members of the Wagner family were arrested and charged with aggravated murder. Jake held out for 2 years, but in 2021, under the weight of the evidence and the pressure of isolation, he cracked. He confessed to everything. In exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table for him and his family, Jake agreed to testify against them. He admitted to personally pulling the trigger on 5 of the victims. He said his father and brother carried out the remaining 3 killings. And he confirmed that while his mother didn't participate in the actual murders, she had been deeply involved in the conspiracy, the cover-up, and the forgery of custody documents. The investigation uncovered the evidence to back up Jake's confession: the cement anchors with the guns inside, bullets matching those found in the victims' bodies, remnants of homemade suppressors in the woods behind the Wagner property, text messages from the night of the killings that aligned with Jake's timeline. Jake Wagner was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 32 years. His mother, Angela Wagner, received 30 years in prison for her role in the conspiracy. George Wagner IV, who chose to go to trial instead of cooperating, was sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And Billy Wagner, the patriarch, the mastermind, awaits trial as of this recording. Imagine being one of the surviving children in the Roden family, growing up and one day learning that nearly your entire family was wiped out in one horrifying night, all over a custody dispute. Imagine carrying that truth for the rest of your life. For the people of Pike County, and especially for the survivors, justice has been slow, but it is finally taking shape. These cases are difficult to hear, but remembering the victims ensures they're never reduced to just statistics. See you in the next one.